Carlos Santana has spent over 5 decades being celebrated as one of the greatest guitarists alive, a man whose sound became inseparable from an entire era of music, someone deeply devoted to spirituality, mysticism, and healing. But underneath that legacy, Santana has revealed something far more personal. A decades-long journey to forgive one of the deepest wounds a person can carry. What he said about how he actually got there, the spiritual reframing, the mindset shift, the years it took, offers a genuinely powerful lesson about what forgiveness actually requires. Today I'm covering Santana's own words about that journey, along with a few other, very different moments of public regret and controversy he's had to navigate in recent years. Note before we dive in, this video touches on childhood abuse, so if that's a difficult subject for you, take care of yourself watching this one. Let's get into it. Santana has spoken about carrying the emotional weight of being sexually abused for a 2-year period during his childhood. He's described how that trauma initially stole a piece of his innocence, leaving deep emotional scars that took a lifetime to fully untangle. That's an enormous thing to carry silently, and Santana carried it for decades before ever speaking about it publicly. Most of his career, through the rise of his band Santana, through the massive commercial resurgence of his 1999 album Supernatural, through decades of touring and public life, this was something he processed largely on his own, out of public view. He finally did open up about it in a raw conversation shared with people. It wasn't framed as a scandal or a tragic revelation designed to generate headlines. It was framed as the foundation of a much bigger story, how he eventually found his way to forgiveness, and why he now believes that journey matters enough to share publicly, in hopes it might help other people carrying similar weight. So, how did Santana actually get there? What allowed him, after everything, to eventually reach a place of genuine forgiveness rather than lifelong bitterness? He's described a specific spiritual reframing that became central to his healing. Rather than continuing to see the people who had severely hurt or demeaned him purely as adults who should have known better, he trained himself to look back at them differently, reinterpreting them spiritually. As emotionally stunted 5 or 6-year-olds who lacked real consciousness or awareness of what they were doing, that's a striking mental shift. It doesn't excuse what happened to him, and Santana has never framed it that way. What it does is change the emotional relationship he holds toward the people responsible, moving away from ongoing rage directed at a fully aware adult towards something closer to recognizing profound brokenness and unconsciousness in the person who caused the harm. For Santana, that reframe seems to have been the mechanism that finally allowed him to set down decades of anger. He views this kind of letting go not as weakness, and not as minimizing what happened to him, but as what he describes as a supreme spiritual achievement, something incredibly difficult to actually accomplish, requiring real, sustained internal work over a long period of time. Here's the part of Santana's story that's maybe the most surprising, given everything he went through. When he talks about his greatest spiritual regret, it isn't the abuse itself, and it isn't the person who caused it. His regret is about the delay. The years he spent allowing anger, resentment, and a sense of victimhood to postpone his own path toward forgiveness and inner peace. That's a genuinely difficult idea to sit with, and Santana has been careful about how he frames it. His core belief, based on his own words, is that withholding forgiveness doesn't actually punish the person who caused harm, it primarily continues to hurt the person still carrying the resentment. In other words, staying angry at someone who may not even be thinking about you anymore doesn't protect you from what happened. It just extends the damage internally, indefinitely. That's become a guiding philosophy Santana now actively shares to help others work through their own trauma, not as a demand that everyone forgive on any particular timeline, but as an honest reflection on what he wishes he'd understood sooner about his own healing. Santana's public reflections on regret haven't been limited to deep spiritual trauma. He's also had to navigate a very different, much more public kind of mistake in recent years, one that required a quick, direct response rather than decades of internal processing. During a concert in New Jersey, Santana made off-the-cuff remarks regarding the transgender community that sparked significant backlash online. Once he recognized how deeply those words had wounded people, he issued a swift, heartfelt apology through Billboard, stating his profound regret over the comments and reaffirming that his core goal has always been to honor, respect, and bring light to everyone regardless of who they are. That kind of quick public accountability is worth noting alongside his deeper spiritual journey, because it shows a consistent thread in how Santana approaches mistakes generally, not defensiveness. The fairly immediate willingness to acknowledge harm and correct course once he recognized the impact of what he'd said. Santana has also had to actively push back against misinformation about himself in recent years. A different kind of challenge entirely, since it involved defending against something that simply wasn't true. In October 2025, his team had to aggressively shut down viral internet hoaxes, claiming Santana had heavily insulted pop star Bad Bunny over his NFL Super Bowl halftime booking. Santana issued a direct statement through jam bands, making clear the posts were entirely fabricated and stating plainly that the sentiment behind them was completely out of harmony with his life's actual purpose, which he describes as spreading unity, light, and soul. That response matters because it reinforces the same underlying philosophy running through everything else in the story. Whether it's genuine trauma requiring decades of healing, an actual public mistake requiring a real apology, or a fabricated controversy requiring a firm correction, Santana's consistent through line has been a stated commitment to unity and healing over conflict at every level. Even outside anything spiritual or public-facing, Santana has faced more ordinary disappointments too, the kind that come simply from getting older and dealing with an unpredictable body. An accidental fall at his vacation home in Kauai resulted in a broken finger, forcing him to postpone his highly anticipated residency dates at the House of Blues in Las Vegas. According to his management team, Santana profoundly regretted having to delay those shows. Rather than pushing through the injury and risking a diminished performance, he prioritized a full recovery, specifically to make sure he could still play at his highest standard once he returned to the stage for his fans. Even in a much smaller, more ordinary setback like this one, the same underlying value shows up again, a preference for doing things properly, even when it's disappointing in the short term, rather than rushing through in a way that shortchanges the people who came to see him. Carlos Santana's music has always carried a reputation for spirituality and depth. What's become clear from his own words in recent years is just how much of that depth was forged through real, difficult, decades-long internal work, processing childhood trauma, learning to let go of anger, not as a favor to the person who hurt him, but as an act of freeing himself and applying that same underlying philosophy of accountability and healing to everything from public apologies to fabricated controversies to ordinary physical setbacks. If this story affected you and you're working through something similar in your own life, know that support exists. A licensed therapist or a trusted support line can be a good place to start. If you want to go deeper into Santana's story, let me know in the comments. I can cover his current tour dates and Las Vegas residency schedule, dig further into his spiritual philosophy on healing, or walk through the full story behind his iconic album, Supernatural. Hit subscribe for more deep dives into the real stories behind music's biggest legends. See you in the next one.